Thank you for taking the time to download and listen to this free podcast from Celtic Underground. You can subscribe and like and listen to your podcast wherever you pick up your podcast feed. You can also subscribe at thecelticanderground.substack.com, where you will get email notification of new content as soon as it is out, and you can subscribe for free. There'll be plenty of free content, articles and podcasts. But also, you can pay a small subscription and you will get extra special content. Anyway, enough of me. On to today's free podcast.
Welcome to Celtic Underground, football's longest running fan media podcast. You know me, and tonight I have got a fabulous guest, a young man who is making waves in the journalism world with his Celtic Academy articles that are in the Herald. This is Josh McCafferty. Josh, thank you for joining me. We've done this already. It failed, my fault. So we're doing it again, part 2, or a better version this time, hopefully. So do you just want to tell the folks here a wee bit about yourself, what you get up to and your interest in the Celtic Academy?
Yeah, thanks first of all, Ross, for having me on. A real privilege to be here, albeit for the second time. But yeah, so I'm Josh. I work for the Herald. My work also goes on the Celtic Way, the National, Glasgow Times, and sites like that. Some of my work goes in print too. I write about Scottish football, Celtic, Rangers, anything that is newsworthy and that is happening in Scottish football. I'll probably be writing about it. I'm also on the Celtic Ways morning briefing from time to time. I study journalism at university, Strathclyde Uni, with a bit of politics thrown in there as well. For good measure, my interest in the Celtic Academy is kind of been long running. For people who don't know, I had the account on Twitter, or X, Celtic Youth and Loan Updates. Did pretty well. I think it almost hit 4k followers before it went dormant due to my commitments at the Herald at the start of the year. And yeah, it did really well. Provided updates on a kind of area and part of Celtic that wasn't really given enough coverage, in my opinion. So I now transfer that kind of academy stuff onto the Celtic Way, where I write a weekly column about everything that's going on in the academy and such. Yeah, that's more or less what I do. Obviously here tonight with yourself to go over all things academy, so yeah, a real pleasure to be here.
And again, my pleasure to have you for the second time. We've got these images up beside us, obviously, as a bit of a prompt for the conversation that we had for the second time. Keep on going back to that, we'll just shut up now. You and I probably both grew up dreaming of coming out of that tunnel and playing on that football pitch. Fair?
Yeah, definitely, 100%.
What position are you playing on that pitch, just if that had ever come true?
Well, if I had my own way, I would have played up front as a striker. But if the coaches had their way, I would have probably played at right back or left back in the dressing room, to be honest.
That would have been mine. Mine's would have been centre-half, central defender. The halfway line would have been my marker of, I don't go past that. In modern football, I'd have been useless. That was my domain. But as you say, we're here to talk about academy. And my wife, I get my wife to check things that I've done before I put them out. And she said she thought pathway or pathetic was a tad extreme. And she's probably right. We're obviously going to talk about Celtic's player pathway in the academy. What do you consider as your idea of pathway?
I think pathway is a word that is used a lot in football, particularly when you're talking about academies and youth ranks. And for me, if you want to define academy, if you want to define pathway, essentially means a visible, a viable route from the academy and the youth ranks of a football club into the first team. And for that to be viable, you need to have consistent evidence that shows that young players can make their way into the first team and become regulars in there. If you're looking at Celtic Football Club as a whole and you're trying to look at a pathway, I would argue there isn't one at the minute, just given by the number of academy players who have came through and established themselves as first team players over the past 5-6 years. There's been very few, if any, so yeah, I wouldn't argue there's one at Celtic at the minute, but yeah, pathway is certainly a word that's used a lot. Yeah, that's my take on that.
I agree. Obviously, something that has been mentioned before is we've had Aidan McGeady, who is one of our probably the best examples of a player who's come through our system. He would argue, and has argued on TV, that a pathway doesn't exist. It's basically if you're good enough, you'll make it. Work hard enough, you'll make it. I would say if you go into any club in the world, you will hear the word pathway when it comes to academy and youth development. So to me, it does exist. Does it entitle players who sign a pro contract at 16 to get into the first team? Of course it does not. That is the most ridiculous thing in the world. However, like you said, to me, it's a structure. It's an idea that is allowing a person to become the best version of themselves that they can, not just as a player, but as a person, and developing them through education, both on and off the pitch, using good coaches, using the best facilities, best standards, creating a high bar that allows them to see how hard they have to work, how high they have to reach to get the chance to go out that tunnel and play on that pitch and live out the dreams that you and I probably had grown up, but just weren't good enough to do. So we're going to move on for that. And we're going to move to here. Now, 25 million reasons why a pathway matters. A lot of what we're going to cover in terms of the players, what we've seen over the last couple of years, will start from when Kieran Tierney went to Arsenal in 2019. So we've got a little slide that's going to come up that will show all the minutes that players who have made their debut since Kieran left, he's now back, get an idea of what sort of happened over the last, well, what are we now, 2019, so the last 6-7 years of what this looks like. In that time, the only player that Celtic have sold since Kieran Tierney left for 25 million, a record-breaking fee, and still technically, I suppose, a record-breaking fee. I know Matt O'Reilly has left. And if you add add-ons and things like that, it's probably going to end up as more. But Kieran is still basically the joint top sale that we've made. The only player since then that's left for over £1 million is Mikey Johnston. And then the list below that in terms of player sales from players who've come through our academy, $200,000 here and there, which is fine. It's good. But as you're going to explain later on when we talk about Club Bruges and various other clubs, and the table of where we lie in terms of development, it's not particularly great.
Yeah, definitely.
Again,
Agree. And then on you.
Yeah, these are some of our success stories. Now, I've got a fair few years on you, so these guys are actually probably ones that you grew up with good memories of. There's something that we covered last time that I actually want to go to earlier this time, which was what you said to me about James Forrest last time and why it's important.
Yeah, pretty much. I was saying that James Forrest, that moment, the end of last season, I think everyone will remember when he scored the goal at the end of the game to get the draw on Trophy Day against St Mirren to continue the streak, a bit like the Undertaker. But the moment in the stadium inside Celtic Park, the sheer raw emotion and feeling that goal, how pleased everyone was for James at that moment, you could not get that from a foreign player, for example. That type of connection and synergy only exists with a player who's graduated from the academy, come up through the ranks, made his way in the first team, consistently played and turned up and been there for the club when they've needed them most. And you can't get that from bringing in someone for £10 million from abroad. Simply you can't. And that's why it's so important that you have players coming through the academy and you have this pathway that allows players like James, Callum there, Aidan McGeady to come through the ranks, and you have that feeling. And I always say as well, Brendan Rodgers says this as well, in fairness, an academy player will always give you 1% more than what someone else will. And that's undeniable. And they'll give you moments and feelings as a supporter that no other player will. And that was no more apparent than at the end of the last season with that moment from James Forrest.
I thoroughly agree. That moment where he scored, I think, in terms of the volume of the roar when he scored that goal, it was end of the season. It's a game that fundamentally was pretty meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But that roar when he scored was something else. Probably one of the loudest of the season, probably up there with Leipzig earlier in the season, things like that. But that emotion that you described there, that feeling as a supporter watching an academy player continue that streak, and you've referenced Undertaker there, and I said this to you last time, I think you're too young to know who he is, but fair play to you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that you said there. To me, that moment was special last season. And so all three of these guys are part of a success story, one that has become quite rare nowadays because these guys all made their debuts way back. Aidan McGeady played up front beside Henrik Larsson on his debut at Tynecastle under Martin O'Neill. Callum McGregor and James Forrest. James Forrest was Neil Lennon's first tenure. Callum McGregor was Ronnie Dyler. Kieran Tierney was Ronnie Dyler. So we're going back a fair bit when we look at the success stories. We've obviously got some guys that have been more recent that have been hyped up, and we've got obviously what happened to them. Now, some people might not be familiar with these guys in these pictures, but going from left to right, we've got Rocco Vata, son of Rudy Vata, who'd played for Celtic previously. We've got Daniel Kelly, and then we've got Daniel Cummings. These were three players who generated a lot of hype, whether it be through social media. Daniel Cummings was obviously a bit of a revelation with the Youth Champions League. You will know that better than anybody else. You covered a lot of that. And what was your thoughts on Daniel as he was coming through?
Yeah, well, he was top scorer in that competition for a good while. Even, I think, up until Celtic got knocked out of the competition at the last 32 stage, I believe it was. He was the top scorer. And you could tell that he has that natural instinct in front of goal, and that he could pull a goal out of nowhere. I also watched him in I think it was a delayed Glasgow Cup final, Celtic B against Rangers B. He scored in that game too. I think every time I watched Daniel Cummins when he was at Celtic and with the B team, he scored a goal. And regardless of your ability to press the game, link up the play, your speed, if you can put the ball in the back of the net, you're going to go places. Obviously, it was our understanding there were other things behind the scenes that went on with Daniel and such. And at the end of the day, he was a really good goal scorer. And West Ham, now he's got that move down south. I'm not quite actually sure. I've not really been tracking his career since he's left Celtic. I'm not sure how he's doing down there. But yeah, you could tell he was a real standout at the level. And I was just surprised at the time that he didn't maybe get more of a chance in the first team. He only has one Celtic senior appearance to his name, came at Aston Villa in the Champions League. But at that time, before Christmas, that season 23-24, it was Brendan Rodgers' first season back. Sorry, no, I'm talking about last season because that's when he scored all the goals. I'm getting seasons mixed up here.
Right.
But Celtic had Kyogo Furuhashi, they had Adam Ida. But in terms of a third choice striker, Brendan Rodgers consistently said he wanted a young up and coming striker who was eager to get minutes, and it was kind of a weird one that he didn't call upon Daniel more than he did. But obviously there's kind of more factors behind the scenes that were happening that we know of.
Yeah. Well, the other two, we've got Daniel Kelly, who won the Academy Player of the Year when they held it at the SECC. Daniel obviously had a couple of fleeting appearances in the first team. Again, the club at the time spoke very highly of him. They were suggesting in the media that they worked very hard to keep him. My understanding of that situation is very, very different from what was presented by the club, but again, we'll cover that later on. Rocco was in the team around about the same time as Daniel. Again, a few fleeting appearances. I think maybe we'll come to the screen in a minute, but I think there was one late in a cup game, or Kilmarnock always sticks in my head, but then every time I'm forgetting who a player's played against, for some reason my head always goes to Kilmarnock. So, but again, a player that was highly thought of, a player that had come through the system, a player whose dad had obviously played for us in years gone by, and he's now moved on to Watford, where he's now playing, I think, fairly regularly. I see his name pop up a fair bit, scored a few goals, obviously getting appearances. So yeah, these are three guys who are an example of ones that were likely, or we were told, were on the verge of making a breakthrough, and then for whatever reason they've left to go on to join other teams. Now, this screen is quite important to me, so I apologise for taking over a wee bit here, Rosh. But Rosh, I'm mixing your name and mine up. I'm doing well there. Josh, this is Celtic's website, and this is the first screen you come to about the Academy. Now, before I go on my little rant here, because there's four things on this page I do not like, and that's excluding the fact that Daniel Kelly and Josh Steady are in that picture, not because I dislike them, but because they're no longer with us. Daniel's at West Ham. Josh, as you rightly pointed out before we came in here, is at Middlesbrough.
That's
right.
Yeah, it's Middlesbrough.
And we don't know who the other person is. We're having a debate of that. So if anybody's watching this and knows who this mystery person on the left is, feel free to let us know, because neither of us can quite work it out for the jawline. But the four things that I really don't like about this is not because I think they're wrong, but they're because I don't believe they're true to the club that I have seen many, many times, whether it be going to watch the B team, the under-19s, whether it be speaking to players, whether it be speaking to families, whether it be speaking to some coaches or some people who have worked there previously. And that is these four words at the bottom, which is their core principles, key principles: respect, commitment, integrity, and support. My feelings towards those things are, we lack all of them, and that really bothers me. And I suppose the question I would ask Josh is, if you could use 3 or 4 singular words to describe the Academy as you see it, which ones would you choose, and do these 4 fit into that?
I think that's the toughest question I've been asked all day. It's a very, very good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know if I can stretch to 4 words because I don't want to be hypercritical. But, I mean, if it is true, then it is true. At the end of the day, I'm a journalist. My job's to tell the truth. If I was to pick a couple of words, my first one would probably be non-functional, dysfunctional. Just given that, as you can see there on your screen, the Academy mission statement is to produce the next generation of Champions League players. And the last Champions League level player that was produced at the Celtic Academy was Cian Tierney. You could argue Ben Gannon-Dokes one of those as well. But, I mean, That's 2 players in the last 6 years, so I would suggest it's dysfunctional in that regard. So that's one word. If sure to push me for a couple of more. I mean, I'm fighting off the top of my head, but dysfunctional is certainly one I would use at the minute, probably the top one.
That's fair. As I say, this is a big bugbear of mine, and we've had articles go out on the site before where literally people have replied to me afterwards and went, "You're holding back a bit, Ross." And I have to go, I am. I'd be honest and say there are a lot of things that both you and I will have come across, you as a journalist and me as whatever it is I am, going to B team games, spending time with players, talking to families, talking to scouts, talking to agents, all these things. And I think if I went through everybody I've ever come across who has a vested interest in the academy, I don't think any of them would use those 4 words. And I include people who I know who don't want to say anything disrespectful about our setup, but they wouldn't use those 4 words. And so that really bothers me, but we'll not stick to that point for too long because we'd be here all night if I went off on a rant on that one. I agree, dysfunctional is a great word for the academy. It's one that I don't think anybody watching this will disagree with, not unless they're paid by the club as it stands. Next one is we've got the co-op system, which is something quite new. Now, for those who are not familiar, the co-op system is something that was set up by the SFA that the clubs agreed to. It has had some consequences, which we'll cover later on, that I don't particularly like. But the general idea, what was your feeling around co-op loans?
Yeah, I thought when I initially heard the idea, I first heard about the idea from yourself, Ross, and then obviously it kind of became official over the summer. And when I first heard about it, I thought this was a good thing. Obviously allowing Celtic to get into a cooperation agreement with 3 different clubs, one from the Championship, one from League One, one from League Two, and it allowed them to send 3 homegrown players under the age of 21 to each of those clubs. However, at this moment in time, we are recording this on the 17th of October.
Yep.
Loan cooperation system started in July, August, I believe. And Celtic currently have 2 out of 9 players available out on cooperations. They only have 1 cooperation agreement, and that's with Ayr United. So that's a big gripe of mine, that Celtic haven't fully utilised this system the best they can. I don't like comparing Celtic with Rangers, but I mean, people in the boardroom seem to think the club's success depends on how well Rangers are doing as well. So if you look across the city, they have 3 out of 3 cooperation agreements with teams in the Championship, League One, League Two. Off the top of my head, I couldn't call the names of the teams they are in agreement with. But yeah, it's a big annoyance for me that Celtic only have 1 agreement. And even at that, they've not even filled that to most they could, because they've only got 2 out of 3 players out on loan at Ayr.
Yep. So just for clarity, Neighbours have got co-op agreements with Wraith Rovers, Alloa Athletic and Stirling Albion. Anybody who's followed the site for a while would have known that throughout the summer I'd been made aware that we'd had conversations with various teams. I was led to believe at the very outset of this that ours were going to be Queen's Park until everything went a bit wrong with them. Obviously, Willie Hoy, and they've done away with their youth system as it stands. Athletic was another one. And I didn't know anything about League Two at the time. There hadn't been any names. Stirling Albion, personally, if I could have chose, they would have been one of the clubs that I'd have looked at, just in terms of proximity, and the fact that having seen them a few times last season, they're a club that I think would have been a good place for some of our young players to go. In terms of the cooperation agreements, you can see these on the SFA website, but basically the only teams who have got 1 in the Premiership are ourselves, with Ayr United, Dundee with Brecon City in the Lowland League, and Livingston with East Fife. In the Championship, Ayr United are the only team to have set one up with East Stirlingshire. So we've got the same amount of co-op agreements as our co-op partner, Ayr United. So I'm with you in the sense that I agree. I personally looked and hoped for more to be done in that situation. We obviously have got the loan players. We've got 3 at Partick Thistle, which has been quite successful for us this season. Sean McCardle's just went there. Ben McPherson, Josh Clark, the young goalkeeper. We've got Mitchell Robertson at Inverness Cali. Don't think he's playing all that much since he's been there. And then, obviously, they're a wee bit older, but they are academy players. Adam Montgomery and Stephen Welsh at Motherwell and Livingston. And then we've got the very young Aidan Taylor, who has went to join East Stirlingshire. Just for clarity, we can't have a co-op agreement with a Lowland League team because we have a B team within the same league. So if you've got a B team in that league, can't have a co-op in that league. But going back to what you said, we've got 1. We've got Ayr United. So we've got 2 players, 9 opportunities to put players out on loan where the players can move back and forth between the club because Celtic would still hold their registration. And we've got 2 out of 9. We have a lot of academy players, a lot of B team players, many of whom have asked the club for loan opportunities, many of whom have had those rejected, going by the information that I've received from various sources. And again, it's a frustrating thing. I think we both agree that we want to see more done with this going forward. And obviously, I don't know how it'll change going into next season, because the B team is questionable next season with the restructuring of the Lowland League. So again, we could end up with even more B team players needing opportunities to go and play elsewhere. And this would be incredibly helpful in doing that.
Yeah, 100%. And even now, when I look at the B team, there are a number of players in there who simply need better experience than Lowland League football. I mean, if you were to put this to the club and you were to say, oh, it's a big gripe that there is only one cooperation agreement signed, I mean, you can already hear the reply in your head, and it would say, well, we've got 3 players out at Partick Thistle, we've got 2 players in the Scottish Premiership, all this. But I mean, if I'm looking at those players in that list you've got up there now, Sean McCardle, El Ewer, Aidan Taylor and Jude Bonner, so there's only 4 there that were playing B team football last season and that essentially that's really not good enough. There's a number of guys in that team, B team now, who deserve to be playing at a higher level and getting more experience than the Lowland League.
Do we agree that, a year in the Lowland League for a lot of these players is kind of the limit because of the standard of playing? It's no disrespect to the Lowland League. People will often make this argument with me and they'll say results don't matter for the B team. And I agree to an extent. But then on the flip side, and I'm interested in your opinion on this, and this is something we never covered last time, so I'm throwing it at you. This is a bit of a curveball. My apologies. When you sign a pro contract at the age of 16, 17, whatever it may be, and you start playing B team football, you're playing professional football. You're a professional player. You're playing full time. You're training full time. You're up at Lennoxtown or you're down at Barrowfield. You've got, I want to say the best facilities, but you've got better facilities than the likes of East Stirlingshire have. Now, East Stirlingshire play just along the road from me. They ground share with Stenhousemuir, and they train Monday night, Wednesday night for about 2 hours. So 4 hours a week they train. Our young professional players are training for more than that in one day. So when they go and play not another B team, when they go and play an East Stirlingshire, for example, I don't expect them to win, but I do expect to see the difference between a professional player and a part-time player. In the games that you've seen, do you think you see a difference once these players have done this for like over a year? So to me, a good example would have been, let's say Mitchell Robertson. He spent most of the last 2 years pretty much playing B team football. For the first year I seen him, to the second year I seen him, I didn't see him kick on any. I would have said he should have went on loan last season. And I would say the same applies to a lot of the B team. But I don't know if that is something that's maybe just me, or if that's something that you would agree with, disagree with.
No, I would agree with you in that regard. No, I think if you're playing Lowland League football, like you say, I mean, you don't expect Celtic B to be wiping the floor with everyone week in, week out. I mean, although their fitness levels are going to naturally be better, their ability, mostly their technical ability at least, is going to be better than a lot of the guys playing in the Lowland League. They're still coming up against people who are... Football is like somewhat their only escape from some of the things they've got on in their life. They're absolutely desperate to get 3 points week in, week out. And equally, you mentioned earlier about kind of should the results or performances matter instead of a higher importance than results. I think when you're playing for Celtic at any level, you should be wanting to win and you should be expected to win. I don't care if that's under 19s, under 17s, under 16s, B team level. If you want players to, when we speak about pathway, we all know the pressures of playing for the Celtic first team. Hugh Keevins says it all the time: a draw is a disaster, a defeat is a catastrophe. And if you want players to be more comfortable when they come into that first team environment, they should have a bit of pressure on them at B team and youth level to pick up 3 points every week and win games of football. Yet again, don't like comparing to Rangers, but Stevie Smith is now in interim charge there for a game or whatever from the under-19s, and watching an interview for him at some point, I can't remember when it was, but he spoke about how at Rangers, you're expected to win. It doesn't matter if it's under-19s level. If your performance isn't good enough, you need to win. But on the other hand, I've spoke to some other youth coaches. I've covered Scotland under-21s a couple of times. Spoke to Scott Gemmell. We all have our opinions of Scott Gemmell and what's happening with Scotland under-21s, but he's a youth coach who I spoke to him multiple times in post-match press conferences, pre-match press conferences and the like, and he echoes the sentiment that it's about the development of the players. It's not about the results. It's about the development of the players to go into the senior Scotland setup. But for me, I don't really agree with that sentiment, especially at Celtic. At youth level, you should have pressure on you to win games, and you should be expected to win games no matter the level you're at when you're playing for Celtic.
That's maybe why Scotland can't beat Azerbaijan under 21s, and you and I have had this conversation, bro. I am not a fan of Scott Gemmell. I'm not necessarily a fan of the system in Scotland as a whole, and we'll cover that towards the end in terms of some of the things the SFA have done. I look at these pictures, and we've got Sean McArdle there, who at the end of last season was a player that I really enjoyed for the fleeting minutes that we've seen him. Personally, I thought I would have liked to have seen more of him. We've got Kyle Ure, who scored for the Scotland under-21s last week, got man of the match in the, was it 12 or 13 versus Gibraltar? I think it was 12.
12, yeah, it was 12, aye.
Yeah, scored, played excellently, got man of the match, but to be fair, it was Gibraltar. Josh and I probably could have got a game for Scotland that day, and the score would have went for 12-11. And then, you know, you've got other guys here. Jude Bonner, what we've seen of him, flashes again. He's played well. At the bottom here, we've got Samuel Izaguzu, who is doing really well in the B team. He's a young player who has kind of jumped very quickly from what was under 16s, now under 17s, and sort of through the 18s, what is now 9s, and into the B team. And obviously the club have given him a new contract, and he's doing really well. And then in the bottom corner there, we've got a young lad who was the top scorer at the Craig Brown Memorial Trophy, which was a tournament up in Aberdeen last season. A young guy, Lucas Cleary, who's doing really well for the under-19s, has featured a wee bit for the B team off the bench. So, you know, to me, I look at these guys and I go, there is players of quality there. Most of them are Celtic daft. Most of them come from families who have, you know, really want to see them succeed. And the one thing I would say is every family I've ever met for all these young players, they all have fantastic support networks. Their families are all incredibly good people, good families, like make sure that they're at every game and, you know, they support each other with getting players back to the game. So I can't speak highly enough of them. So to me, I want to see more of these guys. And I want to go back to James Forrest and say, I want to see these guys in 5 years' time. I want to see them, you know, as unlikely as it is in modern day football, I wouldn't mind seeing a couple of them in 10 years' time having that same sort of story as James Forrest. But the reality is different. And the reality is this. Now, this is the 17 academy debutants since Kieran Tierney left in 2019-2020. We've got an array of players here that have come in through different managers, a couple under Neil Lennon, one under John Kennedy for the short period that he had the gig, a couple under Ange, and then we've got 6, 7 who have had time appearances and minutes under Rodgers. But the common theme as you look through this table is numbers of 1, 2, 3, 5. And when you're looking at minutes, most of them are underneath 100 for their entire Celtic appearances. And you look at their averages per 90 for the game time that they played. And again, you're looking at sort of single and double digits in the very low end. And when you look at this, and we've obviously, again, we've alluded to the fact we've done this already, but when you look at this again for the second time, what stands out or what jumps out at you, good or bad?
Yes, it's even more damning when you look at it again, isn't it? I mean, it again goes back to my point earlier about the Celtic Academy being dysfunctional. You know, the Champions League level players argument or mission statement going through this list here. We obviously don't know how the careers of Colby Donovan, Sean McArdle, Jude Bonner, Cummings, Turley are going to really pan out. But when you look at guys before that who are now a bit older and getting on, you know, Conor Hazard, Stephen Welsh, Scott Robertson, Harper, Montgomery, Dane Murray, etc. I mean, the only name on that list right now that I would say is probably a Champions League level player or has the potential to be a Champions League level player is Ben Gannon Doak. So that proves that the Academy isn't living up to its mission statement. And even not just that, looking at the average minutes per 90, I mean, even the guys who have recently come through, obviously you've got Colby as somewhat of an outlier because he's been thrown in and he's done really well. Absolutely full credit to him. A big gripe for me though about Colby's situation is it's not by design. It's by coincidence. You know, Alistair Johnson, Tony Ralston both been out injured. That's how he's got the opportunity. It's not by a pathway being in place. Celtic will try to sell Colby coming through as being proof that the academy works and is functional, but the likes of me and you both know that it was just kind of by chance and coincidence that he's got his opportunity. But when I do look at this table, you know, as much as guys maybe aren't like Champions League level players, they still are very talented. You know, Sean McArdle, every time I've watched Sean, I've been impressed. Jude Bonner has a real good physical profile for his age, and he's obviously made a couple of first team appearances. Daniel Cummins, as I alluded to earlier, is a goal machine at B team level. Some other people in there as well who are standouts. When we go now to Jude Bellingham, from the 1920 only season when he was at Birmingham City when he was 16, 17 years old, 54 appearances. And if you look at that sheer number of minutes in one season, I mean, I know he's kind of an outstanding talent. I say kind of, he is an outstanding talent who's reached the top level in Real Madrid, won the Champions League. But that only comes, and you can only get a move to Dortmund and then a move to Madrid like that at that age, if you're exposed early on to senior football like he was. He was thrown in, he did really well, and Birmingham made a good bit of money for him too. So I think, yeah, it's grim reading when you look at that.
Judan, his brother.
Yeah.
We're in agreement, and we've talked about this for a long time. You and I have been talking about this now for the best part of a year. I think, what was it we said the other day? 4th of November, I think, was the first time I spoke to you last year. And we talk on an almost weekly basis, whether it's WhatsApp or the odd phone call, things like that. And I see all the same things you do. We share a lot of the same opinions, and it's not to say that we're just sat here echoing each other because we want to. Neither of us wants to be negative about this. We would like to see Sean McArdle get more minutes. We'd like to see, I'm delighted like you to see Colby get minutes. But at the same time, you're right. I know that Colby getting minutes wasn't done by design. He was in Dundee, he was flat hunting, he was going on loan there. 2 players' misfortune turned out to be good fortune for him, which sometimes players need. Sometimes, when you're the third choice guy, that sometimes is your best way, is you need someone to have a bit of bad luck. If you're the understudy, sometimes you need someone to, hurt their ankle going down the stairs if you're on Broadway or whatever. And Colby got that. And to me, he stepped up and he's shown himself to be a good player. He's applied himself really well. Is there moments in games where he's made minor mistakes? Yes. But anybody pointing at our team this season can't point at another player and say that they've not got the same amount of errors under their belt this season. It's been a pretty tough season so far, whether it's senior players or younger players. The one thing I'd say about Colby is he's shown up. He's given it everything. He's given that extra 1%. I'd argue he's given it a fair bit more than that. And so I'm happy to see him playing. But the reality is, and some people don't want to hear this, and it's difficult at Celtic. I don't want to say it's really easy for a manager to go, I am going to put one of these guys and I'm going to give him 44 games in the way that Birmingham did with Jude Bellingham. But the reality is, Red Bull themselves done a study, and their analytics and how they look at the game is pretty much as good as you're going to get at how thorough they are. They looked at the top 100 players in the world, and 99 of the top 100 had been exposed to first-team football by the age of 18, and the vast majority of those players had reached the 50-game mark by the time they were 19, 20. Some of them had already went well past that figure. Bellingham had reached nearly 200 appearances within his first couple of seasons in football. He's not a rare example of what a top-tier, what a Champions League level player looks like at that age anymore. He is now he's a perfect example. He's not the exception to the rule. He is the rule. And if you want to be a club that aspires to have young players coming through your system to be that Champions League level, you need to follow that example. Now, we're going to come at the end and we'll talk about it's not always easy. I've always said this. I've said this in multiple podcasts. I've said this in multiple articles. Celtic is a very, very unique club. There are very few teams in the world that have to deal with the expectations that we as supporters put on those players. Win every week, win in a certain fashion every week. Rodgers has spoken about this, I believe, today in his press conference, where he said sometimes going and managing a Premiership team is like a holiday because they don't have that. We are very unique, so it's not easy. But then that's why it is of the absolute utmost importance that we make sure that when these players are coming through our system, that the standards that are set and the education that they get both on and off the pitch is absolutely elite. They want to use the reference world class, call it whatever they want. It needs to be the best it can possibly be. And this table, to me, suggests that it's not, because I agree with you, many of these players are good, promising young players. Many of them, I think, should and could be in better situations than they are. That's not to say it is not, it's the fault of any one person, but I just don't believe our system prepares them for the standard that we demand of them. Whether they prepare themselves well enough to go through that system, each of them will look back on their career and make that sort of judgment somewhere down the line. But I don't look at Celtic and see a system that is designed to make these guys the best version of themselves, and that really frustrates me. But again, we don't want to labour the point too much, so we're going to move on. And this is all you, Josh. You have done some research. We've talked about models. Club Brugge is currently one of the best examples out there. You've done some research on this. And what I would say is, I don't want Celtic to copy anybody's model. I don't think we can because of the expectations that we put on players. However, I do want us to have our own version, and I want us to eventually get to a point where teams like Bruges might look at us in 10 years' time and go, their model's really good. We want to take inspiration from that. But I'm going to pass this over to you because you've looked at this in depth, and obviously we've discussed this. It's something that I think is really valuable. So, to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think Club Bruges are certainly a club that many people think Celtic should aspire to be like in terms of their off-the-pitch business and their academy and how they run things. Obviously, they're not nowhere near as big as Celtic in terms of a worldwide brand, but they do consistently win titles in Belgium. They consistently qualify for the Champions League. I think they've qualified for the Champions League. They've done better in Europe in recent times than Celtic. In the summer gone by, they made €83.5 million. That's more than double what Celtic made in the summer on 6 different departures. That then allowed them to spend €47 million. That left them in a positive net spend of €36.5 million. So quite stark figures, even for people who aren't mathematicians out there. They matched this positive off-field activity, like I mentioned, with prosperity on it. They've won 4 out of the last 6 Belgian titles, which you could argue is quite difficult to do in Belgium. I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of the system. The league kind of splits into a championship group after each team has played each other 3 times, and then the points get halved. So it's really difficult to actually maintain consistency in terms of winning the title. And they also, obviously, like I mentioned, they consistently qualify for the Champions League, and in 23-24 they got to the semis of the UEFA Conference League. In their current first team squad, they have 4 players who are 2004 or 2005 born. We mentioned Jude Bellingham earlier and the number of first team appearances he's made. Those guys, the 4 players have each made between 34 and 52 league appearances each. Compare that to Celtic, I mean, it's a stark difference, isn't it? Out of that kind of figure that I mentioned earlier, the €83.5 million that they made in player sales, 40 million of those euros were from 2 players who came through their academy, Maxim de Kuiper, who went to Brighton, and Shemzadine Talbi, apologies for butchering that name, he went to Sunderland. Now, although they lost a number of players, they recruit smart, they bring players through the academy. I mean, the goal there, as you can see on your screen, they have a specific goal of transitioning at least 2 youth players to the senior squad every season and then developing 2 regular first team players every 4 years. They beat Monaco early on in this season's Champions League by 4-1. Now, this wasn't a Monaco side who are kind of in the mire. It's a decent Monaco side. They have the likes of Eric Dyer in their ranks. They leathered them 4-1 with an average age in their squad in that game of 23, and that is considering that the goalkeeper Simon Mignolet is 37. 39% of Club Bruges' total minutes in the 2024-25 season came from homegrown players. That was an all-time club record. That is very impressive, if you ask me. We know they gave Rangers a doing in the Champions League playoffs, 9-1, just the 9 on aggregate, 6-0 in the second leg. And in that second leg, 3 out of the back 4 were 20 years old at the time, and those 3 guys had over 200 appearances combined for Club Bruges at that point. Now, in terms of bringing players through, they're very good at it, but they mirror that also with coaches. The head coach, Nicky Hayen, I've seen a couple of people mention him for the Celtic job perhaps next summer when Brendan Rodgers inevitably leaves. I don't think Nicky Hayen would come to Celtic, sorry to spoil people's hopes there. But he's an example of what Bruges are doing really well in terms of, he came through the academy, he was with Club NXT, who are their team in the 2nd division, and he actually took over on an interim basis from Ronnie Dyla and got the job permanently. Why are they so good at all these things? I can already hear people screaming, well, the Belgian Pro League youth ranking, they do this every year or every couple of years. Club Bruges get 539 points. Now that translates to 94% of the maximum score. That's based on 3 key pillars: infrastructure, staff and support. Now they have, and I think this is really interesting and something Celtic should be looking at, they have a study, mindset and development coach. Or I don't know if it's a he or she, they, let's just say, support players in their life outside of football, in terms of their mental health, their education, their nutrition, everything you can think of. They have someone who looks after that. Celtic, as I believe at this moment in time, don't have anyone of that ilk employed by the club, at least for the academy. They mix their transfer model, which Celtic might argue is similar to theirs. It's not as successful. And with their trust in young players, they have a proven pathway, as I have mentioned, and as the stats and the minutes back up. However, this is a long process. This isn't an overnight switch. You can just flick. Vincent Manuert, if that's how you pronounce it, took over Bruges in 2011, 2012. So this has been a 13-year process. It's been very long, but they've done it very well. And now they're certainly a club that Celtic should be looking at and thinking they can take some of this model. Obviously, it's Celtic, the demand is to win the league every season. That's not the demand at Bruges. But at the same time, there are several aspects, at least in the academy side of things, and in the transfer model as well, that Celtic should be looking at and pinching and think we can take that to make ourselves better.
Love it. Agree. And you're right, they don't have the same expectations as we do. But this quote at the bottom of the screen, some people might not be able to read this as they're watching this, or listening to this, should I say. This is from the CEO, Vincent Manuert. What we're trying to do is not to choose between the chicken and the egg, but to go for both. That means we need to continue winning while selling our best players. And I think he recognises that for clubs of our size, and we're in a similar boat, we're in a league that's, miles off the sort of finances that are floating around the top leagues. This is our best chance of being able to compete at that level. We're going to need to sign players, develop players, sell them to generate the funds to allow us to invest more in our setup, to invest more in our recruitment. It's a cycle, and it's something that, as you've rightly pointed out, it's not going to happen in the space of a year or 2 years. It could take 5 or 10 years. But you need to have a plan or a system and a vision for what that looks like. And you need to strive to actually reach the goals that you set yourself. To me right now, I don't see Celtic having any of these goals. They talk about, again, we're going to go back to this world-class hoo-ha. They've never outlined how we get to that point. It's just that's what we aim for. Well, do you know what? I aim to be the world bodybuilding champ, but I ain't doing hee-haw about it, so I'm just a tubby bloke sat talking to you lot. That to me is what the Celtic board is. It's like, and it's to me what the academy is. And I go back to those 4 words: the respect, the support, all these things. Loads of words, loads of slogans, loads of trying to sound good, but very little action that makes us look good and shows that we have the desire that a guy like Vincent Manuert has, or a guy like Tony Bloom has, where, we spoke about this previously, and I don't have the notes around this time because we've moved to this, but where they've, Brighton have employed a chief technology officer who is helping them innovate even further with their analysis, and that analysis extends to their academy, to their recruitment. These clubs are all looking to develop ideas that can help try and bridge the gap that, financially we can't go and compete with Man City. We're struggling to compete with some championship clubs these days. You look at the money that Wrexham are spending. So you need to find other ways. You need to find what's unique about your club. What are your club's unique selling points? And your academy, for us, within this country, especially with the Brexit factor, which I acknowledge makes it a little bit more difficult for us to bring in young players because we used to have the option to bring them in from elsewhere. So we need to ensure that we're the best of the best in this country. And there's nothing that I can see that blocks that, given the resources that we have. But, again, we could be here all night if I keep on going this rant. So, Josh, you sometimes are just going to need to tell me to shut up. The next bit is something that, we talked about this off air. You were a very young man when Tommy Burns sadly passed away. I think, what did we work out you were? You were 3?
3 years old, yeah.
Yeah.
Tom.
And so, to me, Tommy built a legacy that these guys know how to live up to. Tommy Burns' legacy for me is everybody you speak to or listen to talks about him in such a positive way. His personality was infectious. He had high standards. He wanted Celtic to be the best version of Celtic they could be. And when Lennox Town was getting set up, and again, some people might not see this image, this was what I discussed with you previously off air. This image in the background was meant to be a full-size pitch. Now, as you can see, he's got his hands out. He could, nearly touch both balls, courtesy of Peter Lawwell and his now what is a gym at Lennox Town. But Tommy had a vision that was to build something excellent. And he would go and visit Turin, he'd go to Juventus, he'd go to Ajax, he would go across Europe looking for inspiration from the best clubs, the clubs who brought through academy players at the highest level. And he wanted to put his own spin on that and create his Celtic version of it. Now, sadly, he's no longer here today to carry that on. These 3 men are. We've got Chris McCart, who's been with the club for well over 10 years now, I think 2008 when I looked it up. we have got Paul Tisdale, the friend of a golf buddy of Dermot Desmond, who wasn't, what was it Michael Nicholson said? He was known to the club, but there wasn't a formal process to how he now became head of football operations, was it we said?
Yeah, I believe that's his official title, yeah.
Yeah. And we've got Sean Maloney, who's an ex-player. He's been away at Belgium, which to me was a real positive thing because he's been in a setup in Belgium where they've revamped their system. Again, much like Bruges, they revamped it years ago and they've seen fruits of that through the likes of Courtois, De Bruyne, Lukaku, all the young Belgian players there's now. So he's seen what that looks like, or I hope that he's seen what that looks like while he was working with Roberto Martinez over in Belgium. And he's now our pathway manager. Now, I know obviously you were quite young, and so what you know about Tommy is probably comes from old farts like me and then watching the likes of Simon Ferry. But do we think these three guys could live up to the point where, to me, Tommy Burns has a legacy at Celtic, a legacy that I think is amazing, that I really enjoy looking back on, whether it was a manager, player, or as it was with it being the leader of the restructure of the academy that's seen Lennox Town fleshed out and all the work that he'd done with young players. But do these three guys, are these guys going to leave a legacy? Or are they just, I don't want to say wage thieves, but I'm pretty convinced two of them are.
Well, Ross, we sit here in 2025 and Tommy Burns sadly passed in 2008. So that is 17 years. In 17 years' time, in 2042, I somehow don't see us sitting on a podcast discussing the legacies of Sean Maloney, Chris McCart, and Paul Tisdale. And that probably tells you my answer to the question. It's very cliche, but I have never heard a bad word said about Tommy Burns from anyone. He done probably every possible role at the club you can think of, from being a player to a manager to in charge of the academy, everything, and he left a lasting legacy, and he's a legendary figure at the club. And I look at the other people in the foes. I mean, Sean Maloney, it's very early days in his tenure as loan and pathway manager. At least he's somewhat been visible, unlike kind of Paul Tisdale, who's been quite elusive so far. We're told he gave an address to the kind of youth players recently, but other than that, he's been absent. And then we have Chris McCart. I'm not going to say anything else. Yeah, I mean, just that. My initial point, though, we're not going to be sitting talking about Maloney, McCart, and Tisdale in 17 years, are we? But 17 years on from his passing, we still talk about Tommy Burns. So that tells you all we need to know.
We might talk about Sean Maloney in 17 years' time if he gets the manager's job next season. I'm kidding. Stop having panic attacks, everybody. But no, you're right. I don't see these guys. Chris McCart's not going to leave a legacy for me. My opinion of Chris McCart through my experiences of talking to people is one that is extremely negative. My opinion of him is very, very poor. My opinion of the vast majority of the people that he has brought to the club is very, very poor. My opinion of the fact that our board have allowed him to control the academy for all this time without appearing to have any measurement to judge him by makes it, to me, the whole situation is very, very poor. Paul Tisdale, you said this and you put this in your column that was in the Herald today, and I love this because we've spoken about this. Paul Tisdale was up at Lennox Town last week. I sent this to you.
I think it was last week.
Up at Lennox Town, they were doing an elite development day where young players from the B team, the under-19s, and some of the under-17s got the chance to go up and train alongside the first team players who weren't on international duty. And the likes of John Kennedy and Gavin Strachan were there taking the training. I don't know if Rogers was there. I don't know. He might have wee holiday.
I believe he was in Ireland, so he was.
Was Ireland, so yeah. So, but they were up training the likes of Luke McCann and Arnie Engels and things like that. And, a really wonderful experience if you're a young player. So there was guys like young Lennon Watt, Lucas Cleary was there, Izaguzu would have been there. He's been up training the first team a fair bit this season. All these young guys, if I was in that situation, that I'd be buzzing, absolutely buzzing. But I thought it was funny. And obviously I'm not going to reveal who told me this, but when Paul Tisdale gave a presentation, I got a message telling me that this was happening. And someone said to me afterwards, they went, Paul Tisdale gave a presentation which was discussing the standards required and that the manager expected for a young player to develop through the first team. And I was told that a response from an unnamed person was, is this not the guy who signed a load of players that the manager called club signings? What the fuck would he know about what the manager wants? And I laughed, and I'm sat and going, I'm laughing at this. That to me was quite funny, but that point is valid.
Yeah.
If I'm a young player and I'm looking at this guy and I'm going, and I'm looking at all these guys and going, their history, with the exception of Sean, because obviously he's quite new to the pathway manager thing. The pathway manager thing is a whole separate entity in the sense of I still know a lot of players and family members of players who don't really understand what that role is. They certainly last season when Darren O'Day was in that role, most of them just went, he's there from time to time. We talked to him for time that we don't really know what he is. It's in many people's eyes, it felt like a job that was created to separate Darren O'Day and Stephen McManus, and they've held on to it and they've moved on to Sean. Now I hope that Sean goes and does something really good with it, because I think we need to have that sort of pathway loan manager thing. But the co-op thing this season, where we've still only got one when there's opportunity of three, does worry me. Is that under Sean's control? I don't know. But, that is his remit. He was the guy who was out talking to Ayr. He was out talking to League One, League Two clubs. What happened at the end of those processes is I'm not totally privy to, but it is a concern. So, no, I agree. I don't see these guys leaving the legacy that Tommy did, which I find really sad. And one thing I'd recommend, and it's kind of something that some people might have seen or not seen if they've subscribed to the site, is Andrew, who does a lot of the podcasts for this site, done an interview with Tommy Burns' daughter Jenna. Now I apologise if I've got her name wrong. I am terrible with names, but I'm sure her name is Jenna. If anybody's not seen it, go and watch the interview with Jenna. It's amazing. She's the best person in the world to explain what her dad was and what a lovely guy he was, and how in love with Celtic and being the best person he could be, and how infectious he was both on his children and the players that he worked with. It's a brilliant interview, honestly. Go and watch it if you've not seen it. But I hope that one day, whether it's Sean or whether someone else comes in, that someone looks at Tommy and uses him as their example of what this needs to be, what sort of dedication is required, what type of personality, being that good person. And I think you said something the other day there about something Simon Ferry said about Tommy Burns. I can't remember what it was offhand.
Oh, that's a very good one. If you give me a couple of minutes, I might be able to rethink it. Once
Sorry,
I
did you not say
redevelop.
something about you pick him up
Yeah,
to take him at training and stuff?
yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was. I think he would. No, that's what it was. So Tommy would, when obviously the players were at kind of Celtic Park or Barrowfield or wherever it would have been, Tommy would go and play pool with the players. He would regularly, every single day, be in and amongst them and making jokes and having a laugh. And he would phone them in the morning to wake them up to make sure they'd get to training in time. He'd have jokes about them and he'd say, if you don't get your backside to training. But this is one story Cy Ferry tells, and I think he picks up the phone, or one of the youth players picks up the phone, and the first thing they hear is Tommy going, "Can I have 2 Big Macs and fries, please?" And the boys are like, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, if you don't get your arse up, well, that's what you'll be hearing in a couple of years' time." So, it's just a brilliant story. It's one of the many Tommy Burns stories I think you hear from a number of different people, but that's just the type of guy he was, and that's the type of figure you need at Celtic, and it's a type of figure that's lacking these days.
He was a very honest and good person. Was everything I've ever taken was that, is that he was very honest with people, whether it was good or bad news. It was, this is where we are and this is how we move forward. And again, just wanted young players or senior players, when he had the first team, he wanted them to be able to express themselves and show the best version of themselves. He managed to work with nutcases like the Canio and managed to get him to show the best version of himself. And again, with young players, whether they succeeded in the game or whether they succeeded elsewhere in life, it was something that I think he always wanted to promote and took great pride in seeing young players strive to reach their goals. And again, we can't expect every young player to come through and be a superstar. That's just not reality. But I think encouraging them to live their dreams and be that best version was something that he done better than anybody. So to me, he is the sort of person that I would like to see step forward in the future. I don't want to be entirely negative, and I know that you don't either. So we've talked about some of the solutions that we think that we've thought of, throughout the podcast. Obviously, having the best people and, having a structure, using Bruges as an example. These two images here, this is the first team celebrating the title win last season. On the left is I think would be the under-16s lifting the Craig Brown Memorial Trophy in a tournament up in Aberdeen last season. If there was a couple of things that you can think of off the top of your head that you would like to see the club improve that are relatively simple and straightforward, and I can think of loads off the top of my head, but if there was a couple of things from what you've seen, what sort of things would you like to see the club do in the immediate future? And then obviously in long term, we've spoken about Bruges, but changes that to us seem obvious.
Yeah, well, obviously the Bruges model is very hard to replicate in an instant. As I mentioned earlier, it was over a decade for them to get where they are. But right now, I think you could set an in-house target, for example, of certain number of minutes that you should give to academy players for the first team throughout a season. You could hire someone like Bruges have, who deals with off-field issues for the academy players and supports them in that, their education, their mental health, other such issues in life. If you've got someone like that. So that's just two examples that I can think of just off the top of my head at the minute that could certainly make a positive change. Also, they should really be looking to make the most they can out of the co-ops and the number of co-ops they can have. Get another 2 sorted, and that would give you the chance to have 9 players out in the lower leagues in Scotland regularly getting minutes week in, week out. So there's 3. What can you think of?
To me, something that you and I have talked about again privately is the under-19s and under-17s leagues. They are currently stuck in a league system that has 14 competitive games a year or a season. That's just over a game, say 2 games a month over the sort of 9-10 month season, however you want to work it out. So you could throw in the cup, but if you get knocked at the cup early doors, that's 1 game. So you've got 15 competitive games. We see examples in other leagues. We see it down south. They've got EPL2. They also have a league tournament that is teams from across Europe that play midweek. So you're looking at their system as encouraging players to play upwards of 30-odd competitive games at a good standard. To me, we're the biggest club in this country, best club in this country. I don't give a crap what the SFA want to do because the SFA have proven that they don't do it very well. I expect to see Celtic drive for better. If they have to literally, go and pull someone kicking and screaming out of Hampden to try and make something better of that system, go and do it. I want to see players, like Lucas Cleary. I want to see Lennon Watt. I want to see Liam Kennedy. I want to see Aidan Taylor. I want to see kids in 10 years' time or 5 years' time with their names on the back of their kits. I know we're in a protest right now for buying kits, but I'm talking about 5 years' time. So, go easy on me. Hopefully then the protests will have stopped. But I want to see these young kids be encouraged to be the guys lifting a trophy with the fans going nuts behind them. I want to see players who, when they go to the club and they look for opportunities to go out on loan, I want to see and hear them saying, the club were encouraging me to go and get competitive minutes. I don't want to hear the club are telling me it'll affect my future if I come back to club, if I go on loan elsewhere, which is a thing that I've heard fairly regularly from many players. I want to see all the things that you said. I don't think we can ever say, right, we need to have them play X amount of minutes, but I think there's no harm in having a target, so we constantly have that measurement of where we are. And it's not going to happen instantly. It's not going to be, as you say, flick a switch and all of a sudden our entire B team is going to be the first team. I like signing players from Rod. I like to be excited by players of different nationalities, different cultures coming in. Many of them have been our heroes over the years, whether it's Larson, whether it's, looking at the team now, you've got Carter Vickers, whether it's Alistair Johnston, Canadian legend that he is. But at the same time, go back to what you said about James Forrest. I want to see a guy that when my wee boy grows up, he looks at and he feels a sort of connection with, because he hears a voice that he recognises. He sees a player who was kicking a ball about his school playground that's went and played for Celtic and lived the dream. Whether that inspires him to become a great footballer or it just inspires him to become, to have ambition, that to me is the dream. I want to see our club encourage players to be ambitious, and that means setting high standards. It means getting the best people to drive that situation in the hope that, as I say, instead of lifting that wee memorial trophy, they end up lifting an SPFL one, or, God willing, a European one. That would be wonderful. So yeah, give the boys opportunities. We've got a first team squad of 30 senior pros. Do we really need that when we've got guys like Sean McArdle, Colby Donovan, Jude Bonner? We need a better alignment right the way through. Our recruitment and our academy all needs to have a direction and a purpose. We need, and again, people might not like this, we need a pathway, and it needs to be something that is visible and measurable, and it needs to be all the things that you've described. And I hope that we get that. I hope that we get the right people to put that in place.
Yeah, 100%. Even when everyone else seen Colby Donovan's performances, Brendan Rodgers called him outstanding after his display in Belgrade. against Red Star. It was his first ever European start. Now, if that is not enough evidence to suggest that there are talented players in that Celtic academy who can make the step up to the first team at European level. I mean, it's not the highest level, it's not Champions League, but it's probably the best competition Celtic are playing in this season. Players are capable that are in the ranks that are capable of doing that. And like you say, a first team squad of 30 senior pros is bloated. You can only play 11 every week. There is no need for a number of those players to still be at the club now. Obviously, you have Shinyamada, Jemai Simpson-Pusey, Hayatu Inamura, her club signings. But for me, even the Simpson-Pusey thing, I mean, I know he's brought in on loan to be part of the first team, but if you were to ask me who would I rather give the minutes to, Dane Murray or Simpson-Pusey, I'm saying Dane Murray every single day of the week. But yeah, I mean, even going back to the solutions, looking at that picture of the boys on the left, even if there was only 2 or 3 of them, 4 of them in the picture on the right in 5 years' time, that would be getting somewhere. Let's just see if it happens.
Yep, willing that it will. I suppose I want to finish off by saying, first, my thanks to you for doing this with me, and hopefully it's something that we'll look at again down the line. Maybe at the end of the season, we'll look and see if some of these players or player, if Colby has racked up more minutes. Hopefully that will be the case. Maybe we will see some change over the course of the season in terms of the B team, the under-19s, and maybe look at that going again further down the line. The last thing I want to say is there's a lot of people that have spoken to me about this, and they have to show an element of trust that I'm not going to come in here and blab all their stories. Many of them are support networks of young players who have been with us, who are still with us, who have been with us previously. I said this during the podcast, and a more amazing group of people you could not meet. It is a very, very difficult position to be in if you're a parent of one of these young lads, because you want your kid to live his dream. You want to see him walk out on that pitch at Celtic Park, and you don't want to do anything that you ever think would cause any harm to that situation. Celtic don't make it easy for them. It's not an easy thing to be a parent of a young player at Celtic. To me, Celtic need to do more with the support network because they are fabulous. They do want to support the club. You know, it's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes that will mean saying no to a player that they're not good enough, but that doesn't mean that you have to stop helping them be successful somewhere else. So to those people who have spoken to me, who have given me their time, who have shared a great many stories with me, whether it be about coaches like Tommy Burns or whether it be about young players and their experiences, I just want to say thank you, because they're amazing. I have all the time in the world for them. Many of them I speak to nearly as regularly as I speak to you. And so, yeah, my thanks to them and my thanks to you. And hopefully, as I say, we'll see positive changes on the horizon. And that is all from us. Thank you.